English is an incredibly simple but valuable language all across the world these days. With an estimated 1.5 billion speakers, it is currently the single most common language of all, even though only about 375 million, roughly 1/4 of those speakers, are natives. Consequently, the English language is constantly changing at a pace that's quite frankly hard to even keep track of. New words like fleek, lit or sus come and go in the blink of an eye, and even grammar is ever changing. But let's roll back for a second. How then did the English language evolve and become what it is today? Cue the Game of Thrones theme as we are taking a look at the history of English. Let's travel back all the way until about 54 BC. At the time, Britain was settled mostly by farmers who spoke a very basic variety of Celtic. Also around that time, Julius Caesar and the Romans landed in Britain. They had to travel by ship, which made a lot of things quite messy, but finally in 43 AC the Romans kicked off their conquest of Britain, and in an effort to protect themselves from the north, they built a great wall in 122, the Hadrian's Wall. When in 367 AC, however, Roman Britain was attacked by disgruntled armies of Scots, Picts and Saxons, they pulled the switch, packed their stuff and started leaving, never to return. By 410 AC, all Roman troops had left Britain, which left the farmers largely unarmed and vulnerable to further attack. So they called in Germanic tribes to protect them, who gladly accepted the offer, having keenly waited for an opportunity to finally backstab the Brits and conquer their lands. Jutes, Frisians, Saxons and Angles came to Britain, and so, from 450 onwards, the Germanic conquest came to be. Britain was split into Northumbrian, Kentish, West Saxon and Mercian, and the mark of the first period of English was set. Old English, 450 to 1150. It is during this period that we find some texts such as translations, scriptures, writs, which are small pieces of legislation, prose and medical texts, and quite notably, poems such as Beowulf. Such texts were written in runes rather than letters, and as is common with present-day German, verbs were actually inflected for person and number and marked by gender. Here's my name in runic letters simply because it looks cool. A couple of hundred years passed until 978 AC, Ethelred, lovingly dubbed the Unready, was crowned at the age of 10. Norwegians got wind of it, and so in 1013 AC, Svein Forkbeard's armies attacked and forced Ethelred into exile with Richard II in the Normandy. In 1042 AC, Ethelred's son, Edward the Confessor, took back their land and restored the English throne, which he allegedly promised to Willem, then Duke of the Normandy, before dying without offspring or heir. When in 1066 AC Harold was crowned King of England, Willem got a wee bit upset and crossed the Channel, which led to a wee bit of a bloodbath known as the Battle for Hastings. He declared himself king and replaced the English with the French nobility, which we consider the second period of English. Middle English 1150 to 1500. The upper classes adapted to French as their language of choice, while the lower classes kept true to English. Latin was used only in church and official documents. The French nobility brought a variety of new words, which is why in present-day English there's many pseudo-polysemous words, where one has a slight connotation of wealth, such as cow versus beef, or game versus venison, or house versus mansion. Prior to the French influence, English also lacked many abstract terms that farmers simply hadn't any use for, which were now being borrowed and derived into English words like government, baptism, fashion, peace, and so on. At the time, we also find the first written proclamations, testaments, wills, proceedings, and scientific writing. Fun fact, did you know that the first Valentine's letter dates back to 1477? I cannot show you the letter because copyright, but it's listed under the sources section. Check it out. The spoken language sounded a wee bit like this. Unto me recht well-beloved Valentine John Pastor, Squire, be this bill delivered, and so on and so forth. The time is also known for an increase in regional variety and dialect, as for example, the northern would say they, their, them, while the southern would say he, her, hire, hur, hem. Nouns at the time were inflected for plurals and possessives, and verbs were inflected depending on whether they were strong or weak. We fast forward another couple of years until in 1476 William Caxton set up the first printing press of England in Westminster. For the sake of clarity, he didn't invent the press, that's Gutenberg. The guy with the awesome curly beard, not the guy with the awesome curly hair. Anyway, William Caxton and the printing press kicked off what we consider a new period. Early modern English, 1500 to 1700. With the printing press being set up in Westminster and its demand for a unified variety of English that everybody could understand, the London dialect was promoted as a standard English. This brought with it what we call language standardization. Basically, this means that optional variability of English was suppressed and English finally had its first standard variety. What further spawned from this were new genres such as court proceedings, pamphlets, which is sort of a newspaper, quite notably King James Bible, actual newspapers, and for the first time, dramas and written plays. Enter Shakespeare. Another notable fact about the time is what we call Great Vowel Shift. During early modern English, the standard vowel chart we know came to be, as with time the old vowel chart pulled an Italian plumber and one-upped itself, whereby the high vowels became diphthongized and fell out of the chart. So, for example, the E we use in seed became I as in buy, A turned to E turned to E, and so on and so forth. Further, an eth ending was used for third-person present tense inflection as in cometh, which had an added E. The perfect aspect was expressed with to be as in I am come. Word order in questions and negatives was in verse as in came he hither, I know not. And under certain circumstances, the S grew up to work at Wall Street and represent a sick growing curve. All these processes were messy and took a long time, and so there's little else to talk about, so let's jump straight to the next period. Late Modern English, 1700 to 1900. We are steadily getting into a period of imperialism and colonialism, and like so, the British Empire is headed for two waves of expansion. The first one in 1607 was what we call westbound, and landed in Jamestown, USA, where the British settled, explored, and exploited all they wanted. The second one in 1675 we call eastbound, as it landed in both India and Africa, where in good old English fashion they traded, settled, explored, and, you may have guessed it, exploited the locals and natives even more. Something to keep in mind for a possible future episode is that the British Empire colonized large parts of these countries, which made linguistic standardization as started in early modern English a difficult task to achieve at best. More on this later. Further, it is around this time that Samuel Johnson produced the first English grammar in an effort for standardization. Moreover, Sir James Murray finished his decade-long endeavor of creating one of the most important English dictionaries ever. Yes, you guessed it, we're talking about the Oxford English Dictionary. As you may have guessed, standardization was still a largely ongoing process at the time, hence why many of the grammatical features of English underwent only minute changes. However, in the early period of late modern English, nouns were usually capitalized and verbs finally grew to be inflected with either a D or an ED for past participles. Folks of the time also couldn't really decide whether they wanted to write music or music, color or color, and criticize or criticize, but hey, that's something that hasn't changed too much, has it? As a direct result from colonization, the English lexicon also grew larger, probably much to poor Sir James Murray's distaste, as it adopted and borrowed words from a great many languages, such as reindeer from Scandinavian, port from Portuguese, and pajama from Indian. And so, as the years passed, we are finally jumping ahead to our current period of English. Present-day English, 1900 and onwards. English rose to become the major language of the world it is today, spawning a sheer mind-boggling number of dialects and varieties. Paired with the invention of the telephone in 1892 by Alexander Bell, the television in the 1920s, and the internet and its advent of cute cat videos from the 1960s onwards, and a generally vast development of media and technology, English is now a language so full of variety it is hard to describe in such a brief span, and will be the subject of a future episode. Also, a thing to keep in mind with present-day English is that it's a period that's hard to analyze, since, well, you and me and possibly that Google over there, we live in this period. Let's see what's further down the road. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to post them in the comments below and I'll try to see to them as fast as I can. I hope you enjoyed our brief overview of the history and evolution of English up until it became what it is today. Thank you for tuning in and I'll see you next time.